Penguin Random House Audio presents The Quiet Before, on the Unexpected Origins of Radical Ideas, by Beckerman. Read for you by Feodor. To Debbie, if not for you. Whether we are experiencing the world through the lens of speech or the printed word or the television camera, our media metaphors classify the world for us, sequence it, frame it, enlarge it, reduce it, color it, argue a case for what the world is like. Neil Postman. You can't just keep on yelling. Barack Obama. Introduction. Change, the kind that topples social norms and uproots orthodoxies, happens slowly at first. People don't just cut off the king's head. For years, and even decades, they gossip about him, imagine him naked and ridiculous, demote him from deity to fallible mortal, with a head which can be cut. This is true for revolutions of all sorts. Slavery exists, and then a small group of people begin worrying among themselves about the moral blight of humans owning other humans, weighing what might be done. Their talking transforms them into a group with a purpose, abolition, and discussion eventually bubbles up into action, and then into the changing of minds, and eventually, laws. We are gripped by the moment when the crowd coalesces on the street. The adrenaline, the tear gas, the deafening chants, a policeman on horseback chasing down a lone protester, or a man standing up to a tank. But if we rewind to the instant when a solid block of shared reality is first cracked, it's usually a group of people talking. To be more specific, and to reclaim a word that Silicon Valley has turned into meaningless jargon, they are incubating. And the incubation of radical new ideas is a very distinct process with certain conditions: a tight space, lots of heat, passionate whispering, and a degree of freedom to argue and work toward a common, focused aim. Saul Alinsky, the community organizer whose rules for radicals became a Bible for activists, wrote that successful revolutions follow the three-act structure of a play. The first act introduces the characters and the plot. In the second act, the plot and characters are developed as the play strives to hold the audience's attention. In the final act, good and evil have their dramatic confrontation and resolution. The problem with the generation of revolutionaries that Alinsky was observing from his perch at the end of the 1960s was that they were impatient. They rushed to the third act, desiring the revelation that comes from good defeating evil. But this shortcut was not actually a shortcut. It was confrontation for confrontation's sake, a flare-up and back to darkness. It's in those first two acts where incubation occurs. Without the conjuring, the planning, the debating, the convincing, Alinsky knew you might have a fantastic protest that leaves you slack-jawed but empty-handed. Where does this kind of incubation happen today? Could it be on social media? On sites like Twitter and Facebook, where a hashtag gone viral is still seen to possess subversive potential? In our personal lives, we've become aware, mostly, that the platforms are good for some things and not for others. They are hyperactive. They are social in the way a loud cocktail party is, where you flit from conversation to conversation, drawn for a few minutes to someone's crazy story or funny joke, but leave drained by the end of the evening. These are spaces built first to make a profit. About this, we are no longer naive. And as hosts of our conversations, the companies who created them have privileged a certain kind of talk and limited the potential of other kinds. This is by design. And though we still see these tools as a means for connection, We know, intuitively at this point, what forms of expression attract the likes and thumbs ups that are the dopamine reward for taking part. We need to produce the content that triggers big feelings, and trigger is the word. Outrage, sadness, disgust. If social media has made us distractible, dragging us through endless streams of photos and bombastic comments, the implications for social movements shouldn't be too hard to grasp. From the Arab Spring uprising that began in 2010 to #MeToo at the end of the decade, movements that were made on social media also shaped themselves to fit the form of these amplifiers. Full-throated blasts of information meant to grab attention and emotionally satisfy, but hardly built to last. Our digital conversations often feel like they are happening through megaphones, a performance devoid of any true intimacy. Our movements, those crucibles of radical change, now have this same quality. In the weeks after Donald Trump's inauguration, I found myself at protests nearly every weekend. Those were days when everyone I knew felt they wanted to do something, to channel the shock of his win. It wasn't even full-on indignation yet, just shock, into some kind of civic action. I've never been one for demonstrations, but I was out there with my wife and daughters, who made their own signs. One said in dripping red paint, "Love, not hate, makes America great." It was good to be with other people, marching through Midtown Manhattan. But it also occurred to me, in a moment of cynicism or clarity, that everyone around me was incessantly posing for their camera phones. I did it too. The photos were, of course, meant to be shared online. I didn't go to any more protests after those first few weeks, but the images of my daughters and their signs still live on Facebook. I had experienced Alinsky's third act. For all the power social media has lent to movements, allowing them to mobilize with tremendous speed and unprecedented scale, getting everyone to the square or Midtown Manhattan in a matter of hours, it has also stunted them. The paradox, as Zeynep Tufekci described it in her book, Twitter and Tear Gas, is that the megaphone can bring a full-blown moment of attention to activists when they have little or no shared history of facing challenges together. The hard work of hammering out ideology and organizational structure, the building of a strong identity and the setting of goals, all of it can be leaped over, creating movements with all the depth and solidity of a raised fist emoji. What ends up getting lost, because a Twitter or Facebook really has no room for it, is incubation. It's not that it can't happen on the internet. Donald Trump's election was proof, in part, of the successful brewing of the white supremacist and misogynist underworld of the alt-right. Their views were too toxic for the mainstream, so they created their own self-enclosed universes, or were forced into them, first on sites like Reddit, that preserved the old intense chat room structure of the early internet, and then on 4chan or 8chan, or more obscure platforms like Gab. They kept jumping into deeper holes, where, among themselves, they could egg one another on, entertain conspiracy theories, argue about the best way to bring their perspectives to a wider public, try out memes, and vie for leadership. Many of the storylines that were nurtured there, about invasions across borders, nefarious forces controlling wealth and the media, grievances about the emasculating effects of feminism, would eventually find their way into the culture through the president's mouth. This was incubation by necessity, when ideas are so noxious that we push them out of sight and then worry about how they might be fermenting unobserved. We've seen it with child pornography on the dark web and ISIS recruiting efforts. And these are the sorts of examples that jump to mind when we consider closed spaces these days. This is a shame, because in associating these secluded corners only with what is most destructive and abhorrent, we ignore their value, especially for those pro-social forces who badly need such places. Consider Black Lives Matter, by all accounts, one of the most successful movements of the past 10 years. It started.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?